Hello, Barry.
Hi, Johann. Good to see you again.
Oh, likewise.
We got people joining. Oh, we already got 22 people in.
All right, you're joining us from Mannings today? I
I
see.
am. The plan was to sit outside and with a beautiful view as usual in the background, but the weather turned on us. It's actually quite a wintry day outside.
So not golfing weather, is it?
Certainly not, but I'm sure if we were allowed to play golf, I think all our golfers would be on the course. Hello, Terry from Horsham.
Yeah, coming in.
Got
So do you know when the golf course will open or not yet?
Tonight we will hear. So we'll all be watching 8 o'clock this evening. We'll hear if we can reopen Leonard's Lee and hopefully Manning's.
The,
Got Graham signing in from Horsham. Hi, Graham.
all right.
We're just going to give it another minute or two just to give everyone a chance to sign in. We've got Teresa. Hello, Teresa. Alistair. All the locals. Again, amazing the local support we have.
Hey. Michelle and Annie, I see, is also online.
No.
What's the weather?
Gonzo.
Oh, it's
Yeah, just
also
while everyone's signing in, for those of you that don't know, that's Johann's our Cellar Master for Benguela Cove in South Africa, and also soon to be our new UK wine brand. And then we've got Annie, Executive Chef from Benguela Cove, and Michelle, Johann's right-hand winemaker on that side.
Hello.
How are you guys?
All right, and you?
Looks a little bit chilly out there.
Slightly. Very overcast and misty today.
Yeah, you're not going to see a beautiful sunset, I take it.
Unfortunately not, no.
Emma's just saying perfect weather for red. I got that exact same take on it. What the day for red.
Agreed. Okay, Johann, I think we can kick off the webinar. So just from my side, welcome to everyone. This is our fourth webinar in the series. And today our first red wine. So we're going to be talking blends. We've got a beautiful red wine to show you all called Collage, which is a Bordeaux blend. I know blends traditionally, a lot of people are not so sure if blends are good wines or bad wines, and Johann's going to go into that a little bit more detail. Johann, could you let us know what you think on that side?
Yeah, so blends is always a very interesting topic. Yeah, I guess the beginning would be just to say that there's this misunderstanding about blends in that they are all the leftover barrels and tanks and everything that is just put together and there you have a blend, which is it's not the case. Well, for premium wines or higher end wines, definitely not the case. In fact, but I would guess about 90% of wineries, their flagship wine, their very best wine they have in their portfolio would be a blend. So it's definitely not a case of the leftovers. Blending is quite a lengthy process. It takes a lot of time. It takes a bit of experience. So yeah, it's definitely not something that happens in a day or two, but we can discuss that in a little bit more detail. We've got the Benguela Cove collage that we're doing today. The 2015, the one we're tasting was the first ever collage blend that we did. And I'll just touch on the name a little bit later on as well. But basically to be or to qualify as a blend, you need to have a minimum of 2 grape varietals in there, obviously. But there's no maximum on how much you can use. There's no rules and regulations on what you're allowed to mix, which grape cultivars, in what percentages. It's whatever works for you and works in your wine, you can blend and put together. So I do have just a few images and just some general info on blends that I can show. So yeah, blending, it's as I said, there's no rules as to how much you can use. The Collage we're tasting today has got 4 grape varietals in it, and it's we refer to it as a Bordeaux style blend, but obviously we can't call it a Bordeaux because those wines are limited to the region in France, which is Bordeaux, but it's using the same grape varietals as what is grown in the Bordeaux grape region. So this is a blend of 4 grape varietals. Most of the years it had 5. But in this particular vintage, the one that we didn't use was a Cabernet Franc, just purely because, you know, 15 was a very cool vintage, and Cabernet Franc gives you lots of perfumey, fragrant notes. Being a cool vintage, Cabernet Franc didn't really play that role, so we didn't just add it to have it in the back label, but the vintages after, again, we had some Cabernet Franc in there. So why do you blend? Why do you mix wines? It's really as simple as your whole take on it should be is that the end result in your glass should be better than the individual components on their own. So the whole should be greater than the sum of its parts. It's really that simple. It's capturing the best of each of the components and adding to that what it might be lacking or what the other ones have more of, and like building something bigger and better. It's almost like you know, the Tetris game you used to have. You know, it's just putting in all those blocks where the one is missing something, just the other wine might have it, and you just get them all together and to work in harmony. It's a bit like almost like a bit like a band. You know, the piano, the guitar, the drums, they all are beautiful on their own when you've got a solo artist going on it. The same goes with a single varietal Cabernet or Merlot or Malbec. Great on their own, but it's once all the instruments start to play together that the real beauty comes to the fore. As simple as that is my one with blend. And eventually then when you get it all into one place, it's like a puzzle where it all just makes sense, and the end result is actually something that makes sense and that you can see and you get the full picture. The reason why I've selected this image of the puzzle, because there's multiple people doing the puzzle, and that's what's also happening at Benguela Cove. Even though I'm the one sitting here talking to you, presenting the wines, it's definitely not myself doing the blending and building the puzzle, which is in our case Collage. It's one big team effort. It's not something that happens, okay, one afternoon, let's make a blend, so we need to bottle the Collage. It's something that happens over months and over years. Myself, Michelle, and Jaco, our viticulturist, is constantly walking, talking, thinking of where do we want to go with this wine? What is it that we want to achieve, and how do we want it to evolve over time? You know, so it already starts now on what are we going to do with our vines? How are we going to prune them, grow them, make them? So it's something that really happens over a long time, and it's a team effort. I'm quite fortunate to have a great viticulturist in the vineyard, and to obviously have Michelle on board, which has got a great palate as well. So what you enjoying today is a collective effort, which is the way I prefer to do it in any way. If I had to do it myself, it would be kind of quick and easy because I know what I want and I can just blend that. But having a team work on it, one can actually start to challenge each other, and we don't agree on the final wine until everybody is on the same page as what we want to do with this wine and how it should look. So therefore, it takes much longer to get everyone to agree, but the end result is just so much better than someone doing it by themselves. So I briefly touched on it, is that you don't walk up to a table with a lot of wines and then just start blending the wines together. You know from the get-go, long before you've started working with the grapes or the blending the wine, what it is you're aspiring to, a certain style, you've got something you want to achieve. And it's, I must also say, winemaking is not a sport you can ever master. You'll never get to that wine that you've got in your mind, but it's an ongoing process year after year, and every vintage you should be improving from the one to the other. So you've always got something that you're aspiring to, and the closer you move, then stylistically your palate also evolves. So it might take different turns over centuries. If you take many of the famous blends around the world, I was fortunate to do a tasting of a famous Rhone wine over 20 years the other day. And in 3 decades, they've changed their style like 3 times. Not major, but enough for the consumer won't necessarily recognize it. But for us that are focused on these things, you could see how there's an evolution of style over years, which is natural. All wineries go through an evolution of style. But you know what you want to achieve the moment before you've tasted the first wine. So stylistically, what you want to do is one thing. The other thing for me that's super important is balance. And this is, you've got no excuse not to have balance in a blend, because you've got all the components to work with. And balance for me is key. I don't want any edges in the wine, be that acidity or alcohol or tannin. And this slide says sugar, but it means fruit flavor. So everything should be in perfect harmony. It shouldn't be tannins here and fruit there and alcohol there. It should all gel together. So just on blends as well, various countries do blends, some more than others. If you start with France and Bordeaux region, they do mainly blends. If you move maybe to Burgundy, it's not blending, it's single varietals again. If you move a little bit more south to the Rhone Valley and maybe as south as the Châteauneuf-du-Pape, it's all blends, sometimes 7 to 11 grape varietals that they use in them. So those Châteauneuf-du-Pape Rhone blends are more Grenaches and Syrahs and Tempranillos or Monastrell, they call them. Moving over to Italy, a lot of blendings, your Chiantis, your Super Tuscans. Spain, the Rioja, the Ribera del Duero, which is Tempranillo-led wines. So there's various blends all over the world, a lot of countries doing blends. I said a lot of countries doing blends. Some countries would name it after the region, like Bordeaux or the Ribera del Duero. So that will be on the label, and you won't necessarily know what's inside. It's just associated with a region. Where newer world countries, Southern Hemisphere countries, and even the likes of the US, we don't necessarily use our region as the name for the wine. We would call it, like in our case, we've called it the estate Collage. So it's not necessarily using the region. Okay, so just getting to blends in South Africa quickly. You'll remember on our first session we had, I explained the Western Cape, and maybe just for those that are joining for the first time, what you're seeing here, this is representative of the southernmost tip of Africa, where most of our wine growing happens. So this is about a 400-mile top to bottom, left to right. So it's a very small area which we grow our wines, but extremely diverse. These soils in the Western Cape, there's a record of it that goes back as long ago as 1,000 million years back. So this is the oldest, proven the oldest viticultural soils in the world. So this goes back to back in the days with the first supercontinent. And over years, as mountains and oceans and everything has passed and continents have gone from each other, these soils remained intact, but obviously changed quite a bit, and therefore extremely diverse. You'll remember I said that just on Table Mountain alone, there's more plant species than all of the UK together. So why I'm saying this is that, and I get the question quite often, is like, what is South Africa's calling card in terms of grape varietals? Argentina has got Malbec, New Zealand's got Sauvignon Blanc, Australia maybe Chardonnay, Napa, Cabernet, and the list go on. But South Africa doesn't have one or two flagship grape varietals. The reason being because we're just too diverse. So some of these regions, even though it's not a long drive, from there to there, massive difference in soils, temperature, climate, growing conditions. It's the one constant is that it keeps on changing. So whatever grape varietals that work well, this is us, this yellow section in the Walker Bay, is not necessarily going to work in Wellington or up here or even this side. So over the years, we've learned which grapes are better suited to our areas, and there's not a lot of grapes that you can go and plant in all these areas. Some, yes, like I've mentioned, the first time Syrah is one of those that is really open and adapts and shows its climate where it's grown, but the same doesn't go for Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot or Sauvignon Blanc. You're definitely not going to plant that in all these regions. What I want to get to is that in South Africa, we do various blends. So some regions like ourselves and the cooler areas of Stellenbosch, the Helderberg, it's very suited to the growing of quality Bordeaux grape varietals. Up here in the Swartland and even here to the middle, is more suited to slightly warmer grape growing conditions, so more your Rhone style blends. And then we also have a third category, which is what we call Cape blends. So to qualify for a Cape blend, you have to include Pinotage, which is a South African grape, in the mix, and then you can call it a Cape blend. But as to what you mix with Pinotage, that's up to you. So just to explain you why we don't have one signature blend coming out of South Africa.
Thanks, Johann. Certainly blends is my calling card. It's my wine of choice, and specifically Bordeaux blends. I know the first time we planted Cabernet in the Walker Bay, we never knew what we were going to get. And certainly Cab and Cab Franc really do well in that area. So what I suggest is we all pour a little bit of wine. I'm sure we're all developing a thirst listening to Johann. So if we could all just pour a little bit of wine, have a little sniff, have a little taste, and decide what you guys think about the wine. We're going to come back to Johann a little bit later, and he'll tell us a little bit more about the wine. But for now, we're going to cross across to Annie and see what she's decided to pair with this beautiful Bordeaux this week. How are you, Annie?
Hey Barry, hi everyone. So today we thought we'd do something a little bit different, and we're going to be making some griddle bread, and with some strawberry and black pepper basted short rib, and we're going to be serving that with some pesto and pickled cabbage. So it does take a little bit of prep to get everything done and ready. So to start off with, we're going to be making our short rib, which we're just going to take a normal little Bay Marie over here, and we're just going to be adding our little mirepoix in there, which just consists of some chopped onions, some garlic, some carrots, and as you can see, it's all just roughly chopped. It doesn't have to be perfect at all. We got some rosemary over here, and then some leeks and celery. Okay, and how long in advance would you do this normally? It's going to take about 4 or 5 hours in the oven. So normally I put it in the late, like I did it last night, and it was all ready and set to go this morning. But we're going to get to that right now. You can get your short rib. You can just ask your butcher, and they can sort it all out for you. I normally ask them to cut it in about 200 to 300 gram pieces. It's just easier to use, and it just goes quicker in the oven than a nice big piece. So you're going to just arrange that on there, season it nicely, and then you're going to go half stock and half wine. And it's normally better to use the wine that you're actually going to be pairing your dish with. So we used Collage, of course, and then with some beef stock.
And if you don't say you don't want to use wine, can you use only stock or only wine, whatever your preference is?
Of course you can. It doesn't really matter at all. But it's better if you use half wine, half stock. It just gives that extra little bit of flavor which you kind of need. And then so that's going to go into the oven for about 4 or 5 hours at about 140 degrees. And then when it comes out, it's going to kind of look like this. So we just prepared this. I just took some of them kind of, like you see, these ones got some bones in it. So we just took the bones out and then put it in the fridge just to set. So you only have that nice pieces of meat. So for now, we're going to put that aside and we're going to move over to the bread, which...
Quick question, why would you put it in the fridge to set, not just put it directly onto
You can do that. It's just easier to handle when it's all set. So you see, it's a solid piece of meat. And it's not something that's all hot and wobbly when it comes out of the oven and trying to get that onto your grid and try and work with that. But you can do it by all means. Like I said, it's a lot easier for me to do it this way. And yeah, so now we're going to move over to our bread, which we pre-mixed. And we just left it next to the fire for about an hour. So it's just that heat of the coals in the fire. Just let it rose and it's nice. And you can see it's all double in size, nice and fluffy. Gonna take this off. Okay, and then we're just gonna turn this out onto a little flour surface. Just get some nice flour on there. Pop this out. So while we're doing this, Michelle's just getting our coals and everything ready over there, and then you're just going to be using your fingers and we're just going to be pushing this out. You want about it a centimeter thick, you don't want it too thin, so we're going to be making a little bit of a sandwich with everything, all the ingredients when it's done. Okay, and then I'm just going to be using a nice little round cutter. It's not necessary to use a cutter, it's just, as you can see now, it just gives it that nice shape. But you can cut it into squares, you can cut it into triangles, whichever ones you prefer. So we're going to move that over there. Okay, and now we're going to move over to the fire over here. You see your coals, spread that out nice. You want about a medium heat on it, so otherwise your breads are going to burn. And then for your short rib, we're just going to put it into this the way around. Little curl. Pop it on there. Yeah, so you just want it to see it's just out of the fridge, so it's still nice and cold and set. So we just want it to heat up a little bit beforehand. And then we're going to start basting it with our basting sauce, which is our blackberry, strawberry and black pepper basting sauce. So we're just going to close that up, put that on there. I'll move that on the side. And then these, we're just going to pop straight onto there.
We just give them a turn every few minutes.
Yeah, it's going to take about 5 to 8 minutes per side. So while we're heating this up and getting this all ready, we're going to go back to Barry, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about the wine. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Annie. That's looking amazing. We look forward to seeing the finished product. Annie, just before we leave you, could you just let us know what that beautiful statue is behind you? Annie?
What?
Or Michelle?
His name is called Faith, and it's by Anton Smit, who's doing an exhibition at Benguela Cove. So yeah, this is one of these more famous pieces and quite a prominent one on the estate as well. Really beautiful. It's quite nice when we have a nice sunset, unlike today.
I can see the sun in the distance, but obviously very overcast.
Now.
Brilliant. Thanks, guys. We'll come back to you in a few minutes. Hi, Johann. I think it's time for you to take us through this beautiful wine.
I was just a little bit worried there for a while because I saw Michelle defending not to use the wine in the basting, and the chef kept on going on with putting the wine in the basting. So.
Absolutely. You can't make good food without good wine, eh?
Oh, unfortunately. So just to remind everyone, we've got a Q&A button there. So if you've got questions, just put it in there. I'm just worried that we might leave the questions in the chat section. So put it in, and yeah, please ask anything you like. You guys have all been very quiet so far. So as we're talking, you can just put it on there, and we'll cover them as they come up. So the Estate Collage 2015. The name comes from the way we go about the blend and what actually ends up in the bottles. So like when you go on a holiday or a trip and you take various photos, at the end you make a collage of all the highlights or the happy moments or the moments you want to remember. So this is a collage of all our best performing vineyards in that particular year. So we've got vineyards, Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, all over the property. But every year we select those that perform the best in that particular vintage that we want to use in the blending process. And we work only with those, in this case, 4 vineyards, other years 5 vineyards. So it's not every year the same vineyards that we use. Some years one vineyard performs better than another vineyard purely because of the growing conditions or what that season was like. But whatever makes it into the collage is a selection of our best performing or finest vineyards for that specific year. So this vintage was 52% Cabernet Sauvignon, 32% Malbec, 12% Petit Verdot, it's all on the back label, and 4% Merlot. And as I mentioned last time as well, you'll see on the back label there's a QR code which you can scan as well, and it will give you the whole rundown of the vintage, how we went about all the grapes, anything you need from the cellaring, the aging. There's some more recipes on there as well. So if you really want to take a deep dive into all the detail in the wine, please go and have a look there. But talking of blends and why one would blend these grape varietals, and maybe just to deconstruct it a little bit so you understand the role that each of these varietals plays. It's funny, it goes without planning. You don't walk in with a recipe of I want X percentage of Cabernet, so much Merlot, so much Malbec. It changes every year because remember we want to get to the balance. So the percentage you use of each of those grapes depends on where you strike the balance. So in this wine, Cabernet Sauvignon is really the backbone or the skeleton of the wine. It's got structure and it's got tannin, and as I said, it's got, we call it backbone, but it's got power. Okay, Malbec is what I call is the flesh or the curves on the body. Okay, so it doesn't have the same structure and backbone as the Cabernet, but it's got all this juicy fleshiness and gives it a little bit of body and curves. Where the Petit Verdot we've used is called Petit the muscles in the wine. Okay, it's also got a lot of tannin, it's got a lot of color, it's got a lot of acidity, and it also brings a little bit of attitude to this person as well. So that's the role of Petit Verdot. And Merlot we're just using a small percentage in this particular vintage, but it's hardly ever, I can't recall us using more than 15 to 20% Merlot. In this vintage it was quite a small percentage, it was only 4%. But Merlot brings a little bit of fragrance and softness, and it brings that nice, like a tomato leafy character, which is very typical of Bordeaux style wine. So the Merlot in essence just kind of frames everything together. So each of these wines have a role that they play in the makeup of the final wine. So that was just to give you a bit of an understanding of what each of them would do. But let's try it. So you can see it's got like a deep maroon-like color, which is very typical. And then it's got like a nice dried herbs, almost like a licorice note. A little bit of raspberries there, especially now that it's opened up in the glass a bit. There's some raspberry type fruit coming through. I know it's a long time since anyone sharpened the pencil, but for me, it's got like that cedary pencil shavings notes to it that I quite like in this style of wine. It's also, and what is always in our blends or our collage is that like a fresh eucalyptus and like a cherry cigar note on the nose as well.
Johann, I pick up a little bit of boiled sweets.
Yeah. There's some like purple notes in there, definitely. Okay, so let's taste it. Remember, when you have it on your palate, you can suck in a bit of air. It just helps to help the aromas come out and just gives it some bigger presence in your palate. So it's kind of on the entry for me, it's quite what we call linear. You know, it kind of walks a straight line in the beginning, but then halfway through, it's like just like boom, it explodes, and you've got all these layers and aromas and complexity in the wine. So for me, it's like almost like truffly notes, truffly, nutty, toffee, but there's also some juicy, plummy notes in there as well. So this wine is in a phase where it's getting out of its primary fruit, so it's losing some of that very fruity notes, and it's now starting to go over into secondary notes, and that's where the toffee, the truffly notes, the almost like again referring to that tomato leafy flavors are coming from, and that is when these wines become really beautiful. And then, as I said, it's got this. The entry is kind of linear, then it opens up, but it's like it almost finishes seamless again towards this end. It's got this long, persistent, it closes down, but it's got this lasting, seamless finish to it, which is really pleasing. So it's got a.
Johann, you mentioned earlier, about blends and balance, and this is really a fine example of a beautifully balanced wine.
It's for me, they should be powerful but still effortless. So it's quite pleasing to have that finish, which it doesn't leave you dry or your mouth pluckering. So this wine almost leaves you a little bit confused. It's got this, as I said, this explosion in the middle, but then it ends with this elegance. So you're like, what just happened? And that is the beauty of the Bordeaux style of wines, is that you have both power and elegance in the same glass, and that is what I enjoy about these wines. So obviously there's various styles of these blends using the Bordeaux grape varietals. You still get ones that are very sweet or oaky or chunky tannins. As I explained before, that's not our style. Our style is showcasing property, the elegance that we get from the cooler climate where we're in. And also a style, and I'll touch on it a little bit later, that it's quite close to what one would get in the Bordeaux region as a function of our climate. It's what we call, I've been learning you a couple of French words like terroir and all of that, but for me, there's a term that I like, which is just wine making or wine lingo, is Moorish. It's just when you put the glass down, you're almost ready to go for it again.
Have another sip. Johann, we've got a couple of questions coming through. One that I think is a really interesting topic that you and I often touch on, and that's the closure on this wine is a screw cap versus a cork. Do you just care to comment on that?
Yeah, so I mean, the short of it would be that, I touched on it a little bit earlier, that there's about 24 months plus of work going into this bottle of wine. So it's not just receiving the grapes and making the wine and then cellaring it another 18 or 20 months. It already starts 8 months prior to that with what we do in the vineyards, all the work that we do there. Then when it gets to the winery, the wine making, the maturation, the blending, then it's the maturation in bottle after we've bottled it, because we also mature it in bottle for a couple of months before we release it. So it's a lot of work that you put into making this look as best as it can. And from a purely quality point of view, to best protect all of that effort that you've put into the bottle, a screw cap is the safest way of closing a bottle. So there's a whole lot of, I think those days are past that people think screw caps are just on lower end, lower priced wines. For us, it's purely a quality decision, just to make sure that we do not potentially compromise what's inside the bottle by using a piece of bark or cork.
Which can go wrong, can't it?
But there is a but to it. As much as I'm a big fan of screw caps, our follow-up vintages from this one has gone back into corks again, but it's not your natural cork. It's a treated cork, and you might have seen it before. It's like a cork that's been shredded into very fine particles, which they can actually clean and get rid of the component which is called TCA, which gives that moldy, musty smell to wine. So they can clean up these pieces of cork and put them back together into the shape of a cork, and you can put them back into your bottle without the risk of having this cork tape, which is a massive issue worldwide. The cork guys have improved on it a great deal, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And I'm just not willing to take the chance to potentially compromise the wine after all the work that we've put in. So the question might be, so why did we want to go back to this cork again? It's purely because a lot of our wines goes into the restaurant environment, and it's finer dining scene and entertaining environment. So there is still in those places, like in a restaurant, the romance of, pulling a cork and the sound that it makes and all of the show that goes with it. So we've had lots of requests from importers, purely because of the channel some of our, or most of our wines go in. Can you put it in cork? We said, unfortunately not cork, but we'll meet you halfway with these cleaned up cork. And you'll see these days more and more wineries are going down the path of this cleaned up, call it cleaned up cork, for a lack of a better word.
Thanks, Johann. Yeah, I mean, the DM cork has really changed the whole cork industry, hasn't it? Personally, I still love the romance of pulling a good old cork out of a, especially a 5-year-old red, which we're drinking today. That just brings me to another question asked Johann. This wine has been in bottle for over 5 years. It was certainly improved with a bit of decanting. You want to just chat us through that?
Yes, so it's decanting can also be a difficult one. There's two reasons why one would decant. One is to aerate the wine, because the more air you let into the wine, the more aromas come out and the more the wine shows. So my advice is I decant reds between, let's say, 3 to 5 years of their vintage. I would decant them because they're still fairly young, just to let a bit of air in. This wine, I wouldn't worry about decanting. I think it's fine as it is coming from the bottle. So the one reason is very young red wines you would decant. The other one is very old red wines, not to let air in, but to get rid of a sediment that can form in the bottom of the bottle over time. So that's the two reasons why one would decant. But this wine, for me, it's perfect as is. One will have to have a play to see if it helps the wine. But we can, as we chat along, you'll see shows and develops more in the glass as we.
I was just going to say, and it certainly develops in the glass as the sort of webinar's moving on. So I suppose just opening the bottle of wine maybe half an hour to an hour before you due to drink it would be a good idea.
Yeah. Or just, pour your glass like 1/4 full and allow enough air in there.
I think we've got time for one more question, and I think we need to go and see what Annie's up to. Johann, just on red wine temperature, ideal temperature to serve a red wine?
Yes, so it varies from red wine to red wine, but this more bigger style reds, a little bit warmer, closer to 17, 18 degrees Celsius. It's also more delicate reds, lighter bodied reds like Grenaches or Pinots, you can chill down to 15, maybe 14 degrees Celsius. But yeah, good point. Especially this time of year going into summer, there's just a rule of thumb saying room temperature for reds, but room temperature often can be way above 18 degrees Celsius, especially
Your
now.
room temperature and my room temperature are very different, aren't they? And generally, we have a bit of a problem of wine being almost too warm. People forget where they're storing their wine. They're in their houses with heating pushed up to 25 degrees, and where we have issues.
On this wine, as I mentioned before, you're looking to capture the best of all the individual components, and to capture that and put it together in a way that the final product is just something bigger and bigger. So I won't be long on this, Barry. We can share this afterwards as well. I just some of the components: Malbec, Merlot, Cabernet, and you can see that all in there. How full-bodied they are, their tannin structure. So these red lines are intensity levels. So they differ in flavors that you can see there, different aromas. They differ in dryness, how full-bodied they are, the tannin intensity, their acidity level. So your end result, you're looking to push all of these out as far as possible. So you see the blend is capturing kind of the best of all the components, but keeping the balance in mind, because you can just push it over the top as well. So just quickly on this wine, this is from, as I said, different vineyards every year, and I think this is worth mentioning is that where we're in and Benguela Cove, remember this was all uncharted waters back in the days. The vineyards here planted today was the first ever vines to be planted on this piece of land. And the region is kind of known more for its Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, given the climate. So at first we were thinking, in all respect to the viticulturists who planted for having the vision for doing it, but at first everyone was thinking, my word, why would you plant Bordeaux varietals in such a cool climate? It's not going to ripen. And all the proof is there. If you take our neighboring regions, such as Elgin here on top, for those that have been here, and just around the corner here is Hemel and Ada Valley, they won't touch the Bordeaux varietals just purely because the climate is too cool for these to properly ripen and develop enough flavor. So the same thinking was, what would Benguela Cove? Why would they be planting it?
Oh.
And as I said, one big experimental garden. So again, they planted on various soil types, the Cabernet, the Merlot, the Cab Franc, which gives us so much components to work with. And so these are also scattered out on different slopes, different soil types. I explained the row directions before. And boy, were we surprised. The first 1 or 2 vintages, I thought I couldn't make sense of what was going on. And the Cabernets, the Merlots, against everyone's expectations, were just exceptional, and they looked like the old world classical style, which is not something we often get in in South Africa is this classical expression of these grape varietals. And it is second year, third year, fourth year, these wines kept on producing similar quality. And the mistake we made was that we were always just looking at the region as a whole and not as Benguela Cove as a single property. It was only when we started studying what happens on Benguela Cove itself that we've learned, but hang on, what happens on Benguela Cove is totally different from what's happening on wineries and farms in the same region as us. And what we've discovered is that we get nice heat accumulation during the day on the property. So we get a nice temperature spike. But then what happens, 12 o'clock a day, when the wind sets in and blows the cool air coming from the ocean, it just cools it down again. So looking at the average temperature gave us a false indication of what happens, because it gets much warmer on Benguela Cove, but also way cooler because of our proximity to the ocean. So red grapes, as you know really well, love this temperature fluctuation. It allows it to ripen. It gives it all this fruit and aromas, but with the cooling down at night, it still maintains its freshness and elegance, which explained what is happening on Benguela, and just again reminded us that what happens on Benguela Cove is something unique and unlike anywhere else. Hence why we only use grapes coming from the property to preserve that, call it a Benguela Cove character or uniqueness. I wanted to show you this just briefly. If you take, that is Bordeaux in France, maximum and minimum temperatures, and then you've got all the regions from the world. Look how close Hermanus is, maximum and minimum, to what happens in Bordeaux. So again, shouldn't come as much as a surprise why we've been able to produce this quality of Bordeaux style blends. So I've been telling this to a lot of people, especially my winemaking friends, and they all tell me, "Oh, you just what are you talking about? Can't be possible." And so I said, okay, this year when the grapes ripen, I'll go to the vineyards and I'll take a photo as a proof of how much these grapes like Benguela Cove soils and the climate that we have. So I went out to one of our Cabernet vineyards and I took a photo of what it looks like and how happy these grapes are. Great. Proof to show everyone, it's not just a story. While we're outside, more images. We were talking briefly on pesticides and herbicides and stuff a couple of episodes ago. So I just went out to find these guys, our snail patrol, earlier this week, and I asked them to just stand still for a little bit of a photo. So as I said, we use natural predators. There's various ways of doing it, they being one of them, and then slides are jumping by themselves. But before I finish off, one thing I like to do is when I open a bottle of wine, in this case 2015, is to think, where was I in 2015? What did I do? And I would like to ask all of you, you guys are welcome to put it in the chat section. Did you get married? Was it your child's birth? Did you retire? Did you get a new job? Did you move to a new town? And all of a sudden you're like, geez, a lot of time has passed, and what happened in all this, in all these years? And that's the beauty of opening these. It's almost like going back in time and just reflecting on not that just that year, but also what happened, in time. So this is almost like a way of just going back and reflecting a bit, which is something I enjoy about the older vintages in my cellar. So, Barry, where were you 2015, or anything that jumps to mind?
It's quite funny that we're discussing a Bordeaux variety, because it was my first visit to Semillon in 2015. My wife and myself took 2 weeks off and we went and visited Bordeaux, which was fabulous. Really a trip that we will never forget.
I'm sure that you'll never forget that.
No.
Yeah. So,
yourself? What were you up to, Johann?
I really don't know. I was thinking as I was scrolling through, something will come up. I just remember it being a great, exceptional vintage. I probably spent most of my time in the winery somewhere. But,
Yes.
I just, for the fun of it, just to remind everyone what happened in 2015. So, baby Charlotte joined us. Then the Queen then became the longest head of state in history for any country. Long gone, I'm sure everybody forgot about this song called Cheerleader, topped the charts in the UK. Andy Murray and his team won the Davis Cup for the first time in many, I think, 7 or 8 decades. Who will ever forget the VW incident? You all remember this guy, he got kicked off Top Gear. And then Chelsea again was up there. Not so nice note, but significant. The Paris bombings, 2015. I can't believe it. It's already 5 years ago. Bruce Jenner disappeared off the face of the earth, and we got all of a sudden Caitlyn Jenner joined us. For what that's worth. It is also the first SpaceX rocket ever to leave Earth, made it back successfully to land again. A reusable rocket. Old Seth got himself into a bit of trouble. And then last but not least, as I said, 2015 being an exceptional vintage for South African wines. Almost similar to 17, but also 2015 being the first vintage of Collage. So
I've just got a comment from one of our viewers, Julie. She apparently met Paul in 2015. So wishing you guys well into the future. And hopefully you'll enjoy many bottles of Collage along with us.
Is there any questions before I go into some of the wine making quickly?
Let's do a quick one more question. How would this wine compare to a wine from Bordeaux? You did touch on that.
I can quickly answer to that is, as I showed with the climate, very similar to what you will have in Bordeaux, and therefore the style is also very close. So what I like doing whenever I go out and promote the wine, wherever it is in the world, I like putting it in a lineup of French wines, because it always gets even the professionals confused on what is Southern Hemisphere and what is Northern Hemisphere in terms of style, so close. The only difference, again, like when we had a discussion on the champagnes last week, would be the price point. This being at a much more competitive price, obviously.
I've got one here from Linda Ace. Will Cabernet Franc be considered for future vintages of this wine?
Absolutely, Linda. All the follow-up vintages from this wine, or from this vintage, has got a Cabernet Franc component in it as well. So Cabernet Franc usually plays a key role in the blend, but it was just odd in this particular vintage how it didn't really contribute anything to the wine. So it was just best not being in the blend.
Okay, we'll come back to a few more questions at the end, I think. Back to you, Johann.
I don't want to keep you too long, but just quickly on the getting back to the winery and the making of these wines. So Collage, like all our red wines, goes through 7 steps of selection. So the one would be we select whatever our finest vineyards is to bring to the winery for processing. We might sell 1 or 2 of the vineyards in the form of grapes, but we select the best vineyards to come to the winery. On picking, everything is hand-picked. So our pickers in the vineyard would do one more selection where they only pick the best bunches for winemaking. So they obviously skilled, they know what they're doing, they know what to look for when picking. So on arrival at the winery, another selection process. So it's the vineyards, it's the picking, then we do another bunch sorting where we only select the finest bunches to go into the destemmer, which is the machine that removes all the berries from the stems. Once we've got all the berries, and my apologies for these jumping around, we've got another selection process where we select all the finest berries, and anything that we're not happy with comes out. So it's keeping on selecting and sorting out quality from which vineyards, what do we pick, what bunches, to what berries we use.
So everything without a smiley face doesn't go into the tank.
Exactly, all the grumpy ones get removed. So on arrival of the winery, so we can take one vineyard, let's say one Cabernet Franc vineyard, and then we can decide in what type of vessel we want to put them. So you'll see all of these are different vessel shapes. The first one almost closes towards the top. The second one is a normal cylindrical one, so it's straight. And the third one opens up to the top. So being in the position to build a new winery, we've decided let's experiment and learn from what the influence of the different vessel types is on the end result. So even though we have, let's say, 5 Cabernet vineyards, we've got 4 different vessels that we can ferment it in. So our 5 Cabernet vineyards, we can quickly turn into 20 different components. All right. So, and that is just, for us, it's quite important because we don't have a century of winemaking history to learn and to catch up quite quickly on what's the best way to go about our fruit and our vineyards, what brings out the best quality in them. So during fermentation, part of the byproduct is the CO2, the bubbles we discussed last week, and that pushes all the grape berries to the top of the tank. So in this tank, it will all be sitting there, same thing over here. But because this tank is that shape, it pushes down the cap, we call it the cap, the berries back into the fermenting juice. This one, not so much, and this one does the reverse. It opens towards the top, so it allows it to go up, but because it doesn't push it back, it's not as thick as this one. It's a thinner, bigger layer, which allows you for more extraction, you know, that the process where you remove the color and the tannin. So the same grapes in all these vessels gives us 3 completely different wines, and there's a 4th one as well, which I'll show just now. So we're learning what is the best for what vineyard or what grape varietal, given the quality and the style we want. This is not common for a winery to do this. This is just, we're obsessed with quality and precision and getting it right and understanding what we're working with. I can't stand just shooting in the dark and not knowing and understanding what it is we're dealing with. So we go the extra mile in understanding our fruit and the best way to go about them. So these, as I explained previously, is taking juice from the bottom, pumping it over the skins, and like I explained with the tea bag, every time you do this transfer of juice over the skins, you leach out more color and flavor from the wine. The last one would be like a tank that is just cut in half, which we call open tops. So this is not pumping over the juice. We use this punch down arm, which we just push the skins that are rising all the time. We just push them back into the juice. Again, gives you a much gentler, softer extraction and a completely different wine. So we'll end up with 60 to 80 components, which will all go into their own lot of barrels, which would be matured differently. We'll taste them over time. Sorry for all of this. We'll taste them over time, and those ones that really stand out will mature for an additional 6 to 8 months. So there already we lose quite a lot of the components, but the best ones will go on. At the end of the maturation process, we'll taste all the Cabernets, all the Merlots, all the Malbecs, and select only the best of each of those grape varietals to go into the blending stage. So we might start with 30 components, and we'll end up with only 5 of those that will be considered for the blending process. Okay, so when blending, I already explained this. You taste all the individual wines, you identify which of them, what is their strengths, and then you start playing with them in different ratios, different percentages, add them together, taste. It needs more structure, it needs more fruit, it needs more acidity, add more of whatever gives that, taste again. But it keeps on going and changing all the time. So a wine like this, I've went and checked our notes, the 15, we did 16 different blends to get to the final one that's in the bottle today. And then the last step, which is the final step, once we've decided on the blend, there might be 10 barrels of Cabernet and 10 Merlot barrels. We're going to taste each and every barrel individually and only empty the finest ones, the best ones that are of the quality that we want them to be. So long story short, you start with so much, you end up with a little bit, but that's what it takes producing quality. And on a wine like this, and with the whole estate tier, we're pulling out all the stops when it comes to producing quality wines. Okay, so this is blending, and it really does look a bit like this. It goes all over the show from this way to that way to get to the final result. It's quite a journey, and it takes time, but it's looking at this and tasting this today, definitely worth the while. So just to end off with, Barry, yes, there's a lot of science involved. You have to understand how all these components, the acidity, the tannin, the alcohol, how all of them interact. But there's also an element of art and having a vision and knowing what you want and being creative in your ways of getting there. And in the middle of all of that is where the two come together, is called winemaking. And therefore also it's called the art of blending, because if I give that 5 components to everyone on this call, we won't have not one of us will make the same blend, because it's such a personal thing. We have different tastes, different preferences. I might be in a good mood when I'm doing it. You might be in a bad mood when you're doing it. And all of that influences what we end up with in the glass at the end of the day.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Johann. I think everyone would have found that super interesting. I think we're all dying to find out what Annie's done on that side. Annie, I see it looks pretty chilly on your side.
Oh, it's getting a bit nippy, yes. So while you guys have been gone, we've just baked our little breads on the fire over here. So we're just going to cut these open. So as you can see, we've got a nice crust on the outside, and it's still nice and fluffy and hot on the inside. And then if you look at this, let me just pull these closer. We just got a little short roast we just took off. So in the basting sauce, like I said, it's the strawberries and pepper. It's just all those flavors that Johann and Barry mentioned about fruit and the boiled sweets. And so that's trying to incorporate all those flavors in the basting sauce. So that strawberry, black pepper, it's just that spiciness, that fruitiness, and then it just creates all that sugars in it. It just caramelizes nicely when you have it on the braai and all that heat and everything. So you try and keep it on there for as long as possible and get that nice flavor coming through. So we're just going to assemble our little piece of little sandwich, whatever you want to call it, over here. So we got our grilled bread. We just got some pesto.
What's in the pesto?
Well, if you look at the recipe, there's it's not just your plain normal basil pesto. We got, there's a little bit of rockets in there, again, just to enhance that spiciness of the wine or play with that spiciness in the wine. And then there's also quite a bit of mint in there. And I found it quite interesting, the mint with the wine. So after you've tasted everything, that mint just cleans your palate out completely. It just refreshes everything. And it just had that, oh, you just left with that little hint of mint afterwards, which is, I found it very interesting. It kind of blew my mind a little bit. So we got a little bit of pesto. We got, as you can see, it's soft, and nice and caramelized. We're going to put that in the bottom. And then we got some cheese. This is just like a little smoky or smoked cheddar. It's, again, just to enhance that little flavors on the wine.
Pick up the smokiness in the wine as well.
Exactly. We got some freshness from some leaves. Yes.
Some
So we'll just
lettuce.
arrange that. A little bit of tomato. And then we just have some pickled cabbage. And again, we try to work on a bit of color. So we have some white cabbage.
And what did you? What's the recipe for pickling?
Oh, this is just our standard pickling liquid. So it's basically 1 part vinegar, 1 part sugar, and 2 parts water. And you just put that on your stove until your sugars are dissolved.
And for how long can you keep this pickle on average about?
If you put it in a sterilized jar, you can keep it for about a month or
It's-
2. So yeah, it keeps. So we're just gonna put that on the side.
Looks delicious.
Beautiful.
Okay. And
There we
that's
go.
it.
Hope you enjoy it as well.
We're going to try it out now and see if it works. Back to you, Barry.
Thank you, Annie. I wish you could send me one of those. Johann, is that dinner tonight? It is. Fantastic. Guys, we're running short of time, so unfortunately I don't see us answering a lot more questions, Johann. Just from my side, just please, all our viewers, please remember free delivery throughout the UK. We're still selling our 6-week box, and obviously our May box, which has today's wine, and the next wine we'll be tasting will be our Benguela Cove Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend. Certainly a wine to look out for. And we're finishing off the series with a lovely Noble-led harvest. So we're selling that May box for £95, and the 6-wine box, you can go back and look through our webinars and enjoy those wines with us, and that we're selling for £85. So let me know, I'll make sure I get those wines delivered to you. Johann, I've just got one last question that I think we should deal with, and that was, why did Penny Streeter, the owner of Benguela Cove, Mannings and Leonardsley, invest in wine and hospitality industry?
We have another 15 minutes.
We don't, so I think I've got a plan up my sleeve. Do you think we better get Penny to come on the next webinar?
We can try that. Yeah, that'll be interesting. She can maybe answer for herself. I think it would be interesting getting it from Penny.
I'll leave you to convince her.
Yeah, no, I think let's do it. I'm sure Penny will be keen to join us on a call and taste some wines. Let's see if we can arrange that for next week. I've got just a few, Barry, if you don't mind, questions that I can.
You've got 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay, so can you get this wine without tannin, or a wine without tannin? Someone's got like an allergic reaction to tannin. Red wine's not. There's wines like Pinot Noirs and stuff that are lower in tannins. White wines generally do not have tannins. Does the percentage of the varietals change every year? It does, to strike that balance, sometimes less of this and more of that. Is this wine good for keeping? Without a doubt, with the greatest ease, another 5 years. There was a question on how will this change over time. I think it will just, some of that fruity, boiled sweet notes over the next 3 or 4 years would give way, and maybe more like that sandalwood, cigar box, nutty flavors will come forward. Laura, fantastic, said she was married in 2015. And then someone asked, what do we do with the wines that do not go into the collage? So they might not have a fit into the collage, but those wines might be a perfect fit for another wine. We've got a second blend, which is also worth checking out. It's called the Moody Lagoon. So the Merlot might not be a fit for what we need in the collage, because we already might have those attributes, but we might be lacking what this one's got an offer on another place. Just the short answer to that. And then Barry, lastly, also just on there was another question on prices, us versus other countries, and how the prices are quite competitive. I think it's just worth mentioning that buying from Mannings or Heath or from Leonardsley is buying directly from source. I think it's worth mentioning there's not a middleman or an importer. We import ourselves, and there's no distributors or third parties involved. It's buying directly, and therefore quite good prices.
Absolutely, and that's why we're getting these fantastic quality wines to your door for really good prices, as you said.
Okay, I think that wraps up most of the questions. Apologies if I've missed any of them, but yeah, thanks for joining us. And next week we're continuing with the blend theme in a white blend this time around. It's a special wine. It's from our library stock. Yeah, I'm really keen to share that with you and to discuss it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Johann, and thanks to Annie and Michelle, and thanks, of course, to all our viewers for joining us. We look forward to another one of these next week, same time, same place. Cheers, guys.
Bye. Bye.